Latin America's new left, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. In recent elections throughout Latin America, voters favored candidates harshly critical of the economic status quo. The so-called Washington Consensus, a series of market-based structural adjustments favored by the World Bank and IMF, has become a popular issue to campaign against. In the U.S., the anti-American rhetoric and political theatrics of Venezuela's Hugo Chavez commands considerable media attention. In practice, however, most of the region's new governments are pursuing more moderate policies, seeking to address their nation's enormous economic disparities without dismantling the basic structures of a market economy. To help us explore the significance of recent elections in Latin America and how the next U.S. administration might engage with the region's new leaders, we're very pleased to be joined by Jamil Mahuad, former President of the Republic of Ecuador. President Mahuad's political career also included service as the Mayor of Quito, Member of Congress, and Secretary of State for Labor and Human Resources. He previously taught at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Ecuador and now lectures in negotiation, leadership, and politics at universities across the United States. He's currently the Senior Advisor of the International Negotiation Initiative at Harvard Law School. President Mahuad, Jamil, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you very much.
So it's been about 7-8 years since you left as the President of Ecuador, and in that time, I'm wondering if you could start us off by reflecting a little bit on what you've seen as the major changes in Latin America throughout the continent.
Maybe the most important fact is that the economies are growing. That's good news for Latin America. And in the last 5 years, we have a tendency to maintain high levels of growth, around 5%. And this year, 2008, is going to be a good year as well. Maybe we'll have some increases of inflation as well, but basically that didn't happen before in the last 20, 30 years. We have to go to the 50s, the 60s, part of the 70s to get those big amounts of growth. And that makes a big difference. The moment the economy is working, many other things can happen.
Well, that alone, I mean, I want you to talk about other trends you've seen, but that alone is a pretty stark change from the not too distant past, and the picture of Latin America as being, or many countries as being, these economic basket cases, and they're unstable. What has been then? I mean, I guess what have been the drivers of that economic change? Is it the Washington Consensus? Is it other factors? What is driving the economic performance?
I think the most important factor are exports. The moment you can put your products on big markets and at good prices, that makes a big difference. And Latin America has many similarities, but has some differences as well. And for example, oil prices now are so high that for oil exporters countries, that's really good time to live on. And other exports are improving as well as part of the world economy. For some other reason, we were always following the tendencies in the United States economy. But lately, other economies like China have been playing important roles, so we can open other markets where to export, and that is very good. And then we have now a big amount of international resources for financing operations. That is different from the crunch of credit that we experienced at the end of the 90s especially.
There's been, in many countries in Latin America, there's always this sort of love-hate relationship with international investment, that on the one hand there is the need for resources, financial and material and technology and know-how. At the same time, there was resentment that a lot of these companies were really having these predatory relationships with many countries. Has that relationship changed on balance?
Difficult to answer. It depends on time, depends on each country, but it has a logic to it. By definition, a third world country doesn't save. We don't have the capacity for that. And the few people that can save usually save abroad. So even when they decide to invest in their own countries, it comes as foreign investment because it comes from outside the country. And then some of the investors are planning for a long term staying in the country, and others are planning for a very short term because of the instability of the region. So when you are not sure about the political stability, the social, economic stability, you try to get profits as soon as possible. And sometimes you do not respect all the regulations that are there. So the rules of the games, to some extent, dictate that sort of behavior.
So, how about on the political side? So you mentioned the impact that political instability plays on things like foreign investment. What has been the picture on in terms of the political evolution of various states throughout the region?
America Latina have tried many different recipes to get stability and development. We didn't get good results, but not due to the lack of options. We tried many different things. In the 70s, the region was affected by dictatorships, most of the countries. Then we entered the 80s, we came back to democracy. We have governments thinking that the state could provide a lot of subsidies and benefits to the society. It came to a point where the economies couldn't resist that too much. We have the big crisis of the external debt at the end of the 80s. So for Latin America, the 80s is considered a lost decade, meaning that the figures at the end of the decade are very similar to the figures at the start of the decade, meaning that we didn't grow. Yeah. And the population grew. So that means more poverty, less development. Then we entered the 90s, this trends in the world for the neoliberal recipe. We had, in the United States, you call that Reaganomics, President Reagan, Margaret Thatcher in England, and the international institutions applied what you label as the Washington Consensus. And even though some countries could show good results, there was this perception that the macroeconomy was showing good figures, but the economy in the families, in each individual life, was not good. So the disappointments were growing. And in the new millennium, we have this good news of growth, and that at the same time was combined with a sort of exhaustion of the old model. So you try new paths, you try new things, you try different approaches, and that's what we are living now. As far as the economy functions, that things can be developed, I think.
Well, we've seen a variety of flavors, let's say, of this new path from Chavez and maybe Evo Morales in Bolivia, and in some extent the current president in Ecuador, who really talk about. I mean, Chavez talks about a revolutionary sort of government coming in and really changing the way government works and the role it has with the grassroots. To Chile, Bolivia, Brazil, where you've seen sort of a more moderated leftist path. I wonder if you could sort of draw some distinctions between these new models. They're not the Washington Consensus, nor are they the aggressive sort of socialism. So what are they?
Latin America had experience in that as well. We had the CEPAL and what we call the CEPAL model of development. And we practiced that for some time. And we were very good at that, and we got very good results. Latin America was growing in the 50s, the 60s, part of the 70s, very well. So we are trying some sort of regional recipes again. And as you said, we have a big array of possibilities and options in this menu that we could call the left. We have cited the most extreme cases, but then we have big countries like Argentina or Brazil. They have what are considered socialist presidents, but they are playing a lot by the rules of the international market. They are trying to attract investment for the countries. They are growing very well, so they are good examples. A very interesting case is Chile. Chile designed a policy that has been implemented in a very serious way for many governments in a row. We have at least 4 or 5 governments so far. that have decided to maintain that policy. And some of them were Christian Democrats, some of them are socialist, but they stay by the rules they approved at the beginning. So Chile is a very well placed to invest in Latin America because you have stability, which is so important for the capital. And then we have other sorts of government more to the right in Latin America as well. I am not surprised because when you have so many disappointments in the society, as it had happened during many decades in our region, you were trying different things to try to find the hope for the future. So that's from a psychological perspective, from a social perspective, absolutely understandable in my view. The governments are legally elected, they are producing results, they have good amounts of money to distribute now because of the prices, and they have popular support, so that's the situation. Let's see what happens in the future, but so far that's the situation.
How emblematic, how typical is the Chavez approach of the very populist, charismatic leader? You know, in the United States, you would think that he rules Latin America, given how much press he gets here as compared to a lot of these other countries that you mentioned. Could you talk a little bit about sort of Chavez, what you see as his real sort of place and importance in the continent?
Well, presidents are first presidents of their countries, and President Chavez have won some elections rather easily. He lost the last one, but that gave him a lot of support and credibility and legitimacy. Unfortunately, Latin America only makes big news in press like the United States press when something out of the normal situation appears. So we are here concerned about the guerrilla in Colombia, the problems with the leftist guerrillas before in Nicaragua or El Salvador, with the guerrilla in Peru, now with these things that you have commented. And it seems that those are the normal situation in the region, and they are not. They are very important individual cases, but the majority of the region is going different paths. We have 20 or more countries. We have many different sizes. The biggest country is Brazil. Brazil represents almost 190 million people. That's a lot of a big population. Then we have Mexico, very close to the frontiers. And we have some countries that have 3, 4, 5 million people. So the diversity is very big, and it is difficult to have one approach like one size fits all, because it is not that the case.
We're just about up at our break, and I want to begin to transition after the break into talking about what you've seen as the major changes in U.S. policy toward the region, say in the last 7 years or so, to go along with the economic and political changes that we've been talking about. We'll be back in just a moment on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking about Latin America and the challenges the next U.S. president will face in making policy toward that region. And our guest is Jamil Mahuad, former president of the Republic of Ecuador. So, Jamil, before we break, we were kind of talking about the economic and political changes. And I wonder if you could start us off in the second half of the show to talk some about what you've seen as the changes in Latin American policy in the Bush years, really since 2000.
Maybe the main change is that after September 11, Latin America disappeared from the radar screen in the United States. It was very difficult to have any theme or subject to be discussed, not only in political terms, not only at the big levels of government. I would say even for think tanks, for universities, in the community as a whole, it was difficult to bring our themes because the attention was focused in a different part of the world. Now it is changing again. Actually, The importance of the Hispanic vote has been stressed a lot in the last weeks of these elections, especially in states like Florida or California or Texas and New Mexico. So we are reappearing in that scene, and that is good. However, we're still focusing the problem as the problem of the Hispanics living already in the United States. How to get a legal status, how to facilitate the incorporation to be better citizens of this country, learning English, having ways to pay taxes, to receive fair compensations for their jobs, that sort of things. How to get driver's licenses, how to get mechanisms to legalize that situation. And anything that we can do in that respect is very good. We need that. However, we need attention as well to the countries and to the people that are living in those countries over there in the southern part of this continent. And the most important thing from my perspective is trade. It is proven that the moment we can export products with good prices, we have the engine to improve. And it is regulated usually by the world market. Those products are very important for us, but we usually are not big producer. We are not as important for the market as producers. We are price takers, usually. So the attention to trade is very important. I have seen a big discussion in the United States about that, but I would like to put on the table as well that that discussion is still going on in those countries as well. I mean, if some people think that by signing a trade agreement, you are giving chances to those countries to develop and deteriorate the situation in the United States, people in those countries think the opposite way. You can say, if we open the markets in that way, many factories will leave the United States and will install in other countries and we lose jobs. That's a good argument with a basis on it. From the Latin American perspective, you could say, well, if those economies, our economies are open, we will be flooded by products from other countries with lower prices, and we could not compete. Or we could not export to those markets if they will be flooded by products from other countries. So it's a very technical, important discussion. On the other hand, if you do not sign a treaty, you can lose a lot of jobs because you lose access to those markets under certain preferences. Mm-hmm. And when in the region, some countries already have the trade agreements and others didn't have yet, it is good for you to stay away, to stay out, or it's better to join the fray in the situation. And that will be the discussion in the coming years, I think.
So we've seen a lot of debate, going back to the presidential primaries, about the value of NAFTA, and someone recently characterized the discussion between the Democratic candidates as being who could be more against NAFTA, and I guess by extension other free trade agreements. But you're sort of saying from the other end, they're having that same discussion internally. So does that mean that the sort of current free trade model will have to change? I mean, will the next U.S. president have to revisit those free trade agreements and try to find a different form or a different way?
It depends. It depends on each sector of economy. It depends on what are the clauses that you put there for each sector of the economy. It depends on the structure of the production system in each country. So it is very difficult to have a general recipe for that. I welcome a deep discussion about those issues. I welcome a big participation. I welcome to opening the information to everybody. Many people say in Latin America, I can accept this treaty if these clauses are changing in this way. So that produces a fruitful discussion because you are going to very concrete terms. But being in favor or against in general really puts aside the important questions we have to ask.
What have been some of the consequences for the United States from the Latin American perspective, as Latin America sort of dropped off the radar screen, as you said? What is the impact of that on Latin American views toward the United States?
Of course, we don't like that. We resent that. We felt that there were moments in our life where our voice was stronger, was heard, And suddenly, because we are not producing problems like terrorism, we're not as important anymore. We have 560 million people in Latin America. That's almost the double of the population of the United States. So it's as big as the attention we expect to receive. And I'm sure we will get that in the future, because reality dictates that. Political realities, economic realities dictate that.
So if we turn our attention to whoever the next U.S. president is, and what you think are some of the policy priorities that the new president would be advised to consider in relation to Latin America, how do we put Latin America back on the radar screen in terms of U.S. policy?
I would say first it's a political decision. They can decide to have an agenda where Latin America occupies a position. I'm not saying the first position. We are just part of the world, but as important as other parts of the world. Second, it is necessary to invest time and attention and to be focused on the problems of the region. There's a learning curve, and sometimes you need to do that thinking on the future. You will not have an immediate reward in the States, in the national politics, if you do that. But for the future of the region and the world, it's important to do that. So that's a second decision that a person would make, having the broad picture in his mind. Then I would say to discuss point by point the important things with each country. Not every country has the same points. One of my discoveries when I was president of Ecuador was that really we deal with parts of the American government, not with the American government as a whole. If your problems are related to the debt or to economic, you deal with the Secretary of the Treasury. If your problems are more related to human rights, probably you deal with the Secretary of State. If there are problems involved with drugs and trafficking, you have to deal with the agency in charge of that. So each country has like an agency, a secretary you have to talk with first. It depends on each situation. So let's discuss one by one these things. And the final thing, the best policy for the United States in the long run is to allow a sustainable development in Latin America. Because if we developed, we will not need help in the future, aid in the future. If we do not develop, poverty for human reasons asks for help. I remember one of the interventions in this campaign, it was Senator Obama that said that the United States spends in Latin America in 1 year the same amount of money that spends in the war in Iraq in 1 day. So how can you accept that as a rational policy? So we need much more attention and much more aid in that sense as well. And rules of the game. If the rules of the game change and we can participate with a better base, things will be better.
We have just a few minutes left, and I'm wondering, what would be the costs of not putting Latin America back on the agenda? People talk about the inroads that China has made. You referenced to other markets kind of emerging onto the Latin American scene. What are the costs if the U.S. continues to sort of keep Latin America off of the agenda?
First, we live in a multilateral, globalized world. This is not a two-parts world, two-sides world like in the Cold War. So any connection with any other country is welcomed. And China has been very open to that and has been very helpful for many Latin American countries, buying our products in moments where the American economy was not doing well. And when if we wouldn't have exported at that moment, we would have had even more and bigger problems. So that's a fact that we would like to cultivate for the future. As many open relationships with as many producers and consumers in the world as we could find. What is the risk for the States? We are the closest neighbor. The United States is like a continent isolated by oceans, except on the north by Canada and on the south by Mexico. And when you have a poor neighbor, as with Mexico happens, you see how many people come across the borders. It's, in my view, absurd to build a wall to stop that. You cannot call for opening and globalization and free flowing of capitals and open of commerce and stopping people from moving, because those are the sort of double standards of selective policies that we react to against in Latin America. So if you don't do something as a country for the future, you have a bomb ticking there that will increase. It is better to deactivate that, allowing those peoples the chance for different standard of living.
Jamil Mahuad, former president of Ecuador, I want to thank you very much for our discussion of Latin America. Good luck on your visit here in Milwaukee. To our viewers in International Focus, we'll see you again next week.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,